Joining me now is my good friend Dan Shaughnessy, Boston legend and writer of his latest book entitled Wish It Lasted Forever, which is about Larry Bird and that era you covered with the Celtics. Hey, Dan, how are you?
Hey, good, Carolyn. How are you?
Let's start with the book because I know we've talked about it before, but just in case anybody's hearing about it for the first time, tell me a little bit about it.
Well, it's a pandemic book. A lot of us were home all that time and cranking out the books. I've been telling these Celtic stories for the last 40 years from my time covering Larry Bird. And the thing that's kind of relevant to today is that we really knew them in those days because we lived with them, we traveled with them, we were on the airplanes, flying commercial, waiting for bags, going to hotel bars, going to practice on the bus. There was no moat to separate. And you know how it's evolved. It's nobody's fault, but it's hard to explain to Boston fans right now what's going on with Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, why they're in this hole they're in, because no one's that close to them. All these years ago when Larry Bird was MVP 3 years in a row, I could tell you why they were losing. They got swept by the Bucks in 1983, and they were mad at the coach. They didn't like each other. Tiny Archibald was pouting. All these things were happening. So that was just a more innocent time in the NBA, and it kind of gave birth to Larry Magic, the Ali Frazier series of the 80s, which led to Michael Jordan, David Stern, a dream team, and here we are today, and it's a very global, popular sport. So the book's on Amazon. It's still out there. Old days Celtic stories, hilarious. These guys were securing their own greatness, and they never would have been swept by the Miami Heat.
What would Larry Bird have said to the Celtics locker room after that abysmal performance last night?
They got croaked by the Lakers a couple times, and you probably couldn't say it today. He said we played like women, we played like girls, we were sissies. It really wouldn't fly.
Scratch it from the record.
A lot of stuff wouldn't fly. I mean, Kevin McHale took down Kurt Rambis, and Rambis's foot almost hit the rim. It was a clothesline tackle, and it was 2 free throws and down the other end. There was no flagrant and one. There was no suspension, all that stuff. So it was more of a contact sport then, and more of a fun time. Less 3-point shooting, just kind of a old school basketball and good flow. And the key with those guys were, Carolyn, that they were secure in their own greatness. Danny Ainge, Bill Walton, Robert Parrish, Cedric Maxwell. They knew how good they were, and there wasn't a lot of jealousy of who's getting the most touches or who's all first team, all NBA, and that kind of thing. I've just seen it evolve, not in the best way in the last 40 years.
Well, I do want to get into maybe some of the inter-team dynamics, especially with this year's squad and for the last couple of years. I mean, Tatum and Brown, and whether or not this is something that's working and what the future is with these two on the roster.
Yeah.
Larger than that, defensively, they seem to really have lost their way. Who is to blame ultimately for this porous defense that cannot contain Miami at the moment?
It's a really good point, and it's so true, and it gets underplayed in all the noise of all the other stuff that's a little more interesting. But yes, you're right. I mean, last night, Matador defense, and just like Duncan Robinson's beating Marcus Smart off the dribble, getting backdoor layups. It's like, what is going on back here? I think they mailed it in last night. They lost the 2 at home, and they came down here, and that was just a no-show. It was very disappointing for Boston, longtime Celtic fans who have a lot of pride in this team, to see these guys not play hard, not getting the 50-50 balls, not on the floor, complaining to the officials. Carolyn, my God, all they do is bitch to the refs, and it's not attractive. It makes the refs hate them, and they don't get any marginal calls after that, but they complain about everything, and that is not a good thing to do.
Is that a maturity issue that this roster still has not arrived at a place where, even though from a talent standpoint, they are poised to win this title, they're getting in their own way?
I know you made your bones up here, in the Celtic flagship station all those years ago, and the maturity issues are still there. You're right on point. In my view, they've got a collection of AAU warriors, spoiled American kids who've been told how great they were since they were 13 years old, and they are great to a degree. And I think they care about the wrong things. That's a generalization. It's not fair, but Subway sandwich commercials and all NBA Supermax contracts, MVP of the All-Star game. It's like, let's go. It used to be about championships around here, and that's when you're supposed to step up. And these guys have done the exact opposite. Here's a little fact. In their playoffs, they're 4-5 at home. I mean, you don't win a championship if you lose half of your home games. And in the Boston Garden, I mean, the only other loss at home was the Lakers in Game 3 out here. The other 3 teams still playing are undefeated at home. So it just doesn't happen. The Heat are 7-0 at home. And in games decided by 5 or fewer points in the last 3 minutes, the Celtics are 0-6. They turtle. They shrink. Tatum has not scored a basket in the fourth quarter of any of the 3 games against the Heat. So, I mean, call it what you will. It's just not good.
I find it really hard to believe that Miami has a home atmosphere that is more intimidating than the Boston Garden in a playoff situation like this, having covered so many games there. And I can't fathom why you wouldn't be able to get up for those games. But do you think that this is enough of a wake-up call for this roster to, quite frankly, be nationally embarrassed to turn things around? Or is this thing done?
Well, I don't know how you turn this thing around. There's been 149 NBA series that have gone 3-0, and no one's ever won. The Lakers are going to try and do that tonight. Celtics start trying tomorrow. You know, again, you were in Boston when the Red Sox did it in 2004, and they lost their worst game was Game 3, 19-8 at Fenway, and then they won 4 straight. That was a unique team with a lot of strong-minded individuals. You know, Kurt Schilling, Pedro Martinez, Manny Ramirez. You know, I don't see it in this crew. They also had Terry Francona as a Hall of Fame manager. We're not seeing that here. I don't think they're going to be able to do it this year. It's too much to ask. It's too big a hole. There's a reason 149 teams haven't done it. So what they do in the offseason, I don't know. If they get swept, Carolyn, they might have to fire the coach. Poor Joe Mazzulla, not his fault, 34 years old. He's been pantsed by Eric Spoelstra, which we knew was going to happen. That's unfortunate. He's taking the blame when he shouldn't be taking the blame. He should be yelling at his players. He's not doing that. It's just not a good situation. I think he's lost the room. We always say that about teams that are getting, going down so ignominiously. So it's not a good thing. The larger thing, probably, Carolyn, will they trade Brown or Smart, something like that? And maybe it's time to do that. Brown's coming up for the Supermax and all that jazz. And it's a lot of money to commit. These two, Brown and Tatum, have been here 6 years together, 7 years for Brown. Larry Bird won his 3rd championship in his 7th year in the league. I mean, they're not that young anymore. And by NBA standards, this is their time. And they're letting it get away.
Would it be unjust for Joe Mazzulla to get the can after such little time there?
It would be totally unjust. He had a pleasure cruise. They won 57 games. Really, they kind of peaked in January. A little bit of struggle after that. But what we've seen this spring, it's just you shouldn't be learning on the job in the NBA playoffs. It's just not fair. And, the not calling timeouts, refusing to double team Jimmy Butler. They did it twice last night. They got a turnover and a miss. I mean, it was like, it's not that hard. People doing that for 110 years, double team the guy. He won't do it. Haven't solved the Miami zone and the rotations. Why isn't Williams on the floor more? Why are they so beholden to Al Horford? Why is Smart always on the court at the end instead of Derek White? Blah, blah, blah. So there's wrestling. And you can see it. There was stuff on the sideline last night. It's the walls are closing in. It would not be fair. It's not his fault. He was thrust into the position. He'd had a nice year. He's just not ready yet. 34 years old, never coached really at any level. I think D3 in college like 10 years ago or something, but this is just too much to ask.
You touched a little bit about sort of the genesis of the book and the macro differences between the league now and when you were covering it and Larry was in the league and all the other guys that you mentioned. But can you just zoom in and put this particular series in context for the more recent sort of years in the NBA that you've been covering, let's say the last 10 years? I mean, how embarrassing or disappointing is this particular series or this playoff performance when you consider how much talent is on that roster and the way that the doors have opened for them to walk into the NBA Finals if they could simply manage to do what they, in theory, should be able to do?
Well, there's nothing in the last 10 years in Boston. I mean, they've been in the conference finals, I think, 4 times. Got to the NBA Finals last year. Again, this is the time for Tatum and Brown to be getting their job done. Going back to the book, my first year in the beat in the 80s, they got swept by the Milwaukee Bucks. And the team had Bird, Parrish, McHale, Maxwell, Tiny Archibald. They had Hall of Famers all over the place. But they were done with the coach. Bill Fitch had been there too long. He was a Hall of Famer. They were done. And I was with them. And I was able to tell the readers what's going on. They hated their coach. They had tuned him out. It was time for Casey Jones to roll out the balls and say, go get him. Next year, they're bringing Casey Jones. And Red made a major tweak. Tiny retired. And he acquired Dennis Johnson. That's what this team needs. Probably a new coach and maybe a tweak or more than a tweak. Trade Smart, trade Brown, do something, change it up.
I was going to say, if you're a betting man, next season's roster, which big name player out of the starting 5 is not in Boston?
Oh, well, Smart's the easier one to say, and Brown would be seismic because he's so highly thought of, and he was he's top 10 NBA this year, so they take a lot of pleasure in that. But they've got 2 top 10 NBA players. and they're about to get swept by the Miami Heat, a team that had to play 2 play-in games to get in the tournament, who finished 13 games behind them during the regular season, and a team with 7 undrafted players. This is ridiculous.
Even though the stats are what they are about teams not being able to battle back from this deficit, because the Celtics are built the way they are, there's still a very small piece of me, and I guess I'm embarrassed to say I'm an optimist, that says, well, maybe this actually is possible, that they could string together a couple of wins here and battle and claw their way out of this series. But is there any piece of you that feels that from what you've been observing in Boston, or do you really feel like they do not have the desire and the will to put in the effort to do something like that? Because basically what we've seen is Miami out-hustle these guys, play better defense than these guys, scratch and claw their way as an 8 seed to overtake what was a title contender, a title favorite.
No, yours is a good question there. I don't see it from this group, but I see the talent of this group. There's enough talent to beat Miami 4 times in a row. There is. And we're just not seeing it. I think they're demoralized. But on paper, you go back and look at this, Carolyn, ESPN Analytics had 97% the Celtics win the series going in, whoever the geeks are that do these things. After they go down 0-2, it was still 65% that they win the series. The Celtics were favored by 4.5 going into Game 3 after losing 2 at home. The Heat have gotten no love. Celtics are prohibitive favorites because of the talent they have, and a lot of people in the country follow them and like them. So, yeah, I mean, you could make a case that Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Al Horford, Marcus Smart, that they could beat the Heat 4 straight times. But the Heat are mentally tough. They know they've got these guys now. They're built in the image of Pat Riley, and the Celtics have shown us nothing except turtling in close games.
Sorry to interrupt you. What are the Boston sports fans saying? What are some of the words that are being used to describe this playoff performance in this series?
Disgrace, embarrassing, turtling, just, again, a lot of fans back there, they're even older than me, Carolyn. They go back to the 50s and 60s, and they're all about Bob Cousy and Bill Russell and Sam Jones. And it's like, what happened here? This wasn't the Celtic way. So they've only won 1 championship since I covered the team, part of that book. That was 1986. They've won 1 since then. It was 2008. So it hasn't been this run of titles for them. It's been a long drought. And this was supposed to be their time, their year. They were in the finals last year. They were up on the Warriors 2-1. And it didn't last the last 3. So, Brad Stevens goes out and gets Malcolm Brogdon, and Robert Williams is healthier, and he's playing now. And they're deeper. They're ready. Tatum is MVP of the All-Star game. 2 guys in the top 10 on the voting for All-NBA. And it's like, okay, this is their time.
What specifically is plaguing them offensively? We talked about how bad the defense has been.
It's just they rely on the 3 like everybody, and that's another reason it was so much better back in the 80s. But they rely on the 3, and then at the end of games, Carolyn, they get stagnant. It's iso ball, hero ball, not enough people touching the ball, and bad decisions. And like I said, Tatum, no buckets in the fourth quarter of any of the 3 games in the conference finals here. Last night, Brown and Tatum were 1 for 14 on threes. They missed their last 13. They shot 34% from the floor. So it's just stagnant and not looking for other guys, no motion, and too much complaining to the officials. The officials hate them as well as everybody else right now because all they do is bitch to the refs.
Yeah, that's never a good thing. And this seems to have gotten away from them quickly. Nobody really can see turning back around. Dan Shaughnessy, thank you so much. Put us both in a time machine, because honestly, if I could leave today behind, I would as well. I feel like I'm sick of everybody. Are you? I mean, I want to go back a couple decades.
Oh my God, it was so much more fun then. That's what the book's about. Wish It Lasted Forever on Amazon. Go get it. You'll have a blast reading it.
Absolutely. Can't wait to read it. Thanks, Dan. Good to talk to you.
Thanks, Carolyn.